One dictionary definition of a virtuoso is one who has special knowledge or skill in music. Another definition is one who devotes special attention to technique in playing. By either definition, Lenny Breau is a virtuoso. We tend to think of him as a Canadian because he spent his formative years in Winnipeg, but actually he was born in Maine, the son of Hal Lone Pine Breau and Betty Cody, both country singers. They moved to the Maritimes, then to Winnipeg, where Lenny Breau, billed as Lone Pine Jr., began to perform with his parents. This was in the early 1950s. About 3 decades later, Lenny was here in Toronto playing at Bourbon Street, and I invited him to our studio for a talk. I asked him about his childhood and the early influence on him of the great country guitarist Chet Atkins.
He was playing the rhythm with the thumb and the melody with the fingers, and he could play like by himself. And it sounded like two guys sometimes, you know. So I learned how to play that way first.
It's interesting that many years later he became a great supporter of yours, didn't he?
Yes, that's true.
Lenny had no formal training in music or on the guitar. He just picked it up as he went along. And as he told me, it was a sink or swim situation. Jobbing around Winnipeg, he learned from every experience. Eventually, Chet Atkins heard about him and became a great Breau fan. Here's how Lenny remembers it.
This is back in the 50s. I think I was 12 years old. And they'd go to New York, or they'd go to Nashville and do a recording session. And like Atkins was a sideman back then. And they'd tell him, listen, we got a young boy at home. He's 11 or like 12, and he's trying to play like you, and he's really good, and like Chet said, oh yeah, right, is that right, and like he sent me a little autograph picture, looked like good luck with your guitar playing and all that stuff. And then I finally got to meet the guy in 1969. I was doing a show, let me see, it was out of Winnipeg. And it was my own show. It was called the Lenny Breau Show. There was me on it, and I had I think there was a couple girls on it, looked like singing too. And somebody heard that show. They were traveling through with the Grand Ole Opry, and this guy that played guitar was a friend of Chet's, and he says, well, give me a tape of that show, like just the sound, Mm-hmm. And he brought it down and played it for Chet, and Chet heard it and, flipped out.
In a moment, we'll look into how Lenny Breau switched from country music to jazz, among other things. But first... Lenny Breau playing A Taste of Honey. Unlike many guitarists, he plays with all the fingers of his right hand, and as he told me, in a sense, he imitates a piano. Influenced by pianist Bill Evans, he developed a unique guitar style which exploited the instrument's harmonic potential to a point rivaling the range of a keyboard instrument. But there were other jazz influences, too.
Well, when I was 15 years old, I started listening to jazz guitarists, guys like Johnny Smith, Tal Farlow, and Barney Kessel, and those people. I think the first jazz album I ever bought was a Dave Brubeck record. And I said, boy, I'd sure like to play that kind of music. And also there was a guy from town here, you know, like he's still here, like Ed Bickert.
Ed Bickert, sure.
Right? And, well, I used to see him on TV all the time. And I hadn't even started playing jazz yet. I was still playing country, and I used to see Ed playing on TV, and I was saying, boy, I love that music, you know.
Lenny has always been an individualist, almost a loner, who could not easily be bound by convention. All kinds of music interested him, and he was determined to play in many modes. When he is supported, as he was during his stay at Bourbon Street, by a skilled bassist like Dave Young, the results can be breathtaking. At other times, he prefers to work alone, unhampered by restrictions, free to shift moods or tempos, or in any other way capture the moment. Here's an example. On his 1979 album, on the Adelphi Jazz Line label, he includes a song of his own composition. He even did a little singing on it. It's a haunting little item called 5 O'Clock Bells.
Can't sleep, too late now, 'cause I hear 5 o'clock bells in the morning. If I could but see 5 o'clock bells in the morning. If you lend an ear, you will hear, you will hear. Oh, I love to hear 5 o'clock bells in the morning. 5 o'clock bells in the
Lenny Breau and 5 O'Clock Bells. It's been said that Breau is at his most original playing jazz, but that doesn't stop him from playing other types of guitar music. He's attracted to flamenco guitar and also to classical guitar. There are times in his playing when you cannot help but think of Andres Segovia, the great Spanish classical guitarist. I asked Lenny about that influence.
Well, I went through all these periods in my life. I went through the Chet Atkins phase, and then after that, I started listening to Sabicas. He's a flamenco player, and I studied that stuff by myself for 2 or 3 years. And I was buying, like, books on classical music and learning the techniques and listening to Segovia and these people. And I learned the techniques, and I learned a few of the tunes. But then I decided I didn't want to pursue that because, that's a thing that takes all your time. You know, like, if you're going to be a classical player, well, you got to play it all the time. And so I was torn in between, improvising and playing classical. And I couldn't do both, so I had to make a choice. So I went into jazz. So what I do is I apply those techniques to my jazz playing.
When Breau decides to explore a different field, he plunges in. Once he became attracted to flamenco guitar, he didn't just fool with it. In fact, he wrote a piece that relied heavily on the flamenco flavor, but still had elements of jazz in it. Appropriately, he called the piece Span Jazz. Here it is. Lenny Breau playing his own compositions span jazz. One of the things that make Breau's playing so intriguing, apart from his technical virtuosity, is his ability to blend different elements, different forms, into a cohesive whole. Inevitably, there have been some critics who dismiss him because he doesn't stick to one thing. He is, they argue, neither fish nor fowl, neither all jazz man nor all classicist. I asked him about this.
Well, I think that maybe in the beginning, on like some of my first albums, they had a tendency to sound like I was trying to play everything I knew on the album, right? You know, I wanted to make sure I did a little country. I wanted to make sure that I did a little flamenco and this and that. So they sound like, oh, man, like here's this guy that's playing everything. And some of these jazz people, like, they'd rather hear, like, just straight jazz guitar or just straight flamenco. But now what's happened after all these years, it's been like 20 years or so, like all this music is starting to flow, like look like in a natural way now, right? I don't sit down and say, well, I'm going to play this part flamenco and then I'm going to play this part a little more classical. I let it happen the way it wants to happen.
The way it wants to happen. That statement suggests there's a force at work not quite under his control. Perhaps that's the creative force, the part of him that transcends categories and forms and restrictions, that takes command of his technical prowess and helps unleash that inherent gift of his that sets him apart from most other guitarists. A good example of this is Lenny's longish but totally original interpretation of the Richard Rodgers melody, My Funny Valentine. This again is solo guitar with no overdubbing or other recording stunts. And you'll hear Lenny laying down an infectious walking bass line while also carrying a melodic line with his right hand. And at other times, his grasp of classical technique is almost Segovian. Here's Lenny Breau and My Funny Valentine.
This tune is called, It's My Funny Valentine.
Lenny Breau and his virtuoso performance of My Funny Valentine. Like other jazz musicians of his generation, he's now 42 years old, Lenny has had his bout with drugs. In his case, it was a long and serious battle, but he realized in time that it was damaging him seriously. The drugs had become the most important thing in his life, rather than the music, and that realization helped him to straighten up. Today, Lenny is a far more mature person than when I last talked to him a decade ago. He has a sense of communicating with his audience. He has a higher regard for the melodic gold to be found in Rodgers and Kern and in Porter. And he has a sensible, though not humorless, attitude about the world of music and his place in it.
And now I don't call myself like any particular thing. Like I don't say I'm a jazz guitarist, I'm this or I'm that. I just call myself a guitarist. But jazz is my main thing.
Yeah.
But sometimes if you call yourself a jazz guitarist,
you don't eat.
right. Especially if you're in Nashville, because I lived in Nashville, like a few months. And if you call yourself a jazz guitarist, man, you don't work.
I believe it. Yeah.
So now I just, I'm a guitar player.
And what a guitar player! You don't have to take my word for it. Here's what Chet Atkins, one of Lenny's earliest idols, says about him. He is one of the true geniuses of the guitar. I suppose he's a musician's musician. His knowledge of the instrument and the music is so vast, and I think that's what knocks people over about him. But he's such a tasty player, too. I think if Chopin had played guitar, he would have sounded like Lenny Breau. I think I'll rest my case with that accolade and with a short but decidedly appealing item from one of his newest LPs on the Adelphi Jazz Line label. Here's Lenny Breau and Autumn Leaves.